We're at the Statler Hilton Hotel in Dallas in the suite of Ricardo Montalban. Mr. Montalban is in town to attend the Southwestern premiere of Hemingway's Adventures of a Young Man for 20th Century Fox. And Ricardo, it's just a great pleasure to have you on our program today.
The pleasure's all mine, I assure you, Bobbie.
Are you on a tour of a number of cities?
No, we came expressly to Dallas only for the opening of Adventures of a Young Man. And it's my first visit to Dallas, and I assure you it shall not be my last. It's a
Good.
marvelous place. The people are so hospitable that it makes it very difficult to leave.
Well, you know, we Texans say the same thing about your native country of Mexico.
Thank you very
That
much.
the hospitality is marvelous and that we look forward to coming back many times.
Delighted to hear that.
Well, Ricardo, tell us a little bit now about Adventures of a Young Man, the type of film that it is.
All right. Adventures of a Young Man, I am very proud to be a part of this film, is based on some of the early writings of Hemingway. And it's really the story of a young boy growing and learning to face and accept life. Mm-hmm. And so this young boy, we see him at home, and then he leaves home, and along the way he meets some very interesting characters. I believe his father is played by Arthur Kennedy, his mother by Jessica Tandy. Then he goes on he leaves home to explore new horizons and new worlds, and he meets on the way Paul Newman, plays a beautiful role. Then he goes on and he meets Corinne Calvé, he meets Jimmy Dunn and Dan Daly. And then finally, Hemingway then, because this is supposedly a story about Hemingway himself. Mm-hmm. He wrote about himself as a young man. He volunteered for the Red Cross in Europe during the First World War. And so there in Europe he meets a very lovely girl played by Susan Strasberg and a corporal played by my favorite actor, Eli Wallach, and an Italian major. And I had the privilege of playing this. The young boy is portrayed by Richard Beamer. You probably know him from West Side Story.
Yes,
and
yes,
so forth.
indeed.
So he plays Hemingway as a young man. And it's, I think, a very varied film with very, very interesting performances. And I think a very interesting one and exciting one. And as I say, I am very proud to be a part of it.
What is the time of the...
During the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the
But it sounds, Ricardo, as if it is the type of thing that people today would easily and readily identify themselves with.
Oh yes, I think the period in which it was filmed, it's really the interesting thing is to see how a young man develops and against enormous adversities has to accept life and face it and grow, which is our mission in life, isn't it?
And of course the film is in color.
The film is in color, directed by certainly one of the finest directors, Mr. Marty Ritt. The picture was produced by a very wonderful man who contributed so much to motion pictures. I said contributed in the past because I'm afraid that is the way it is. He passed away like 3 or 4 days ago. He was supposed to be here with us today, Mr. Jerry Wald.
Yes,
who was a
passing.
great credit to the industry, a very energetic man who had enormous faith in Hollywood and its product, and who always kept abreast of the times and stimulating production, which we so badly need in Hollywood today.
Ricardo, what has been the reaction thus far of the film, the people who have seen it in the industry or out?
It's I think it's a distinguished film, and I think, fortunately, I don't know critic-wise how it will be accepted because I haven't read any reviews. It hasn't opened, really, in many places. But the one thing that we know is that the audiences love it, and it plays very well for an audience. This I assure you, it's not just a plug, it's the absolute truth. So actually, if the critics don't like it, and the audiences do, that's what we make pictures for, it's for the audiences. But I think the critics will like it because, as I said, we had some very distinguished performers.
My goodness, it sounds like a who's who, really.
Hemingway in the background of it all, it's a very imposing and wonderful figure.
Well, Ricardo brought up the subject of Jerry Wald, and we have with us today a man who's worked a long time with Jerry Wald, and I'd like to introduce at this time Mr. Don Prince of the Wald Organization. Don, I know how you feel having worked so long with Mr. Wald, but let's talk a little bit about Wald and Hemingway, if we might. They were good friends, is that right?
Yes, Hemingway, Wald has been trying to buy Hemingway property for a long, long time to make a picture out of it. He tried to get across the river and into the trees, and Hemingway wouldn't sell it to him. And this is a friendship that goes back to the days when Mark Hellinger made The Killers.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And it was when Hellinger and Wald were both old New York newspaper men. When they came out to Hollywood, Hellinger said, "What am I going to make into a motion picture?" He said, "Why don't you make The Killers?" He said, "Well, it's only such a short thing." But it became a very successful motion picture. And then Hemingway and Mark and Wald formed a corporation. They were going to film a series of Hemingway works. Now, unfortunately, Hellinger died, and the plans came to nothing. And then from that time on, Hemingway had a lot of unfortunate experiences with filmmakers. He didn't like the way they treated his works. But finally, he sold Wald these Nick Adams stories,
Mm-hmm.
which were considered by some to be autobiographical, though he denied it, Hemingway denied it himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that through A.E. Hotchner, who did our script, who's done so many of the TV adaptations of Hemingway's works, we did a very good and faithful script. It was difficult because we took 10 different short stories and welded them into one screenplay. And Hemingway read the script before his death, and he okayed every page of it. In fact, he'd written us a foreword which he was going to deliver himself. And then, unfortunately, when Wald and Ritt, the director, and Hotchner, the writer, were in Verona selecting sites for the picture, Hemingway died on July the 2nd of last year.
It's really ironical that first Hellinger, and then Mr. Hemingway, and now Jerry Wald. All three are gone now.
Yes, it is. It's a great shock to us in the manufacture of motion pictures in Hollywood, because Wald was a real producing producer. He probably made more pictures and had more plans for making more pictures than any man in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with him for the past 6 years, ever since Peyton Place. And it's it is a very great loss to the industry.
Well, I'm sure that everybody in the industry, whether they'd ever worked with Mr. Wald or not, would agree to that. Ricardo, what are you going to be doing when you leave here now?
Well, I am going to go back home to my wife and 4 children because I've been away from them long enough. I've been in Europe making 3 films. One of them was Adventures of a Young Man. So all in all, I've been gone almost a year with only 2 weeks in between each picture at home. And so now I am going to go there, and I'm going to take my tie off, and I'm going to lie on the floor with all my kids on top of me and forget work for a while.
Well, we wish you a happy voyage or a journey back home, and our sincere thanks to you, Ricardo Montalban, and to you, Don Prince, for being our guest today, and every success with your motion picture, Hemingway's Adventures of a Young Man.
Thank you.